Hello, and thank you for joining me here for a fairy tale from the Isle of Man. I can remember many, many years ago, before I started school, so I would have been 4 or at most 5 years old, which would make this presumably 1969. My mother used to regularly read me stories from a book of Manx fairy tales. And I can remember one particular day, we were on the roads here on the Isle of Man in our car, driving home from the town of Douglas, passing through Laxey. And on this occasion, it was my grandmother who was reading me one of these stories in the car. I can remember the book. I can remember the cover of the merman and the merchild on the front, and its kind of pale turquoisey blue background. And I can remember details of the story. We were passing through Laxey, and I can remember it referenced Laxey, and it was a story about a Bugain, which is a kind of bogeyman, ogre, shape-shifting creature from Manx myth. And it was describing its teeth like knives. And since we were driving through Laxey, I can remember looking through the car windows, wondering if I would catch a glimpse of the Bugain, which obviously lived in these parts. Now, I can already hear some people saying, children don't have memories like that. You don't remember these things through to adulthood. Well, I do. I can quite clearly remember my second Christmas when I would have been 19 months old. I can remember things before that. It's just that I can pin the date on the Christmas precisely. I can remember it vividly. And I loved that book, and I loved those stories, and I loved the way that my mother and my grandmother would read them to me. And I wish more stories of this kind were read to more children today. When I grew older, old enough to have my own money in my own pocket earned by my own labours, I tried to find that book. And of course, I bought the well-known volume of Manx fairy tales compiled by Sophia Morrison. And I thought it had a yellow cover. I thought it's got a different cover. And I read it eagerly. But it wasn't the same book. It wasn't the same book of stories that had been read to me as a child. That story about the Bugain with its teeth like knives, that precise description based in Laxey, wasn't there. And you know how you begin to doubt your memories. And I said, maybe I misremembered. It was a long time ago, but I knew I didn't. And then at Christmas again, a couple of years ago, my wife Celeste had bought me a book. She'd found it in an old second-hand bookstore selling through Etsy. And there it is. Fairy Tales from the Isle of Man, collected by Dora Broome, with that image of the merman and the merchild in the cover. Look at this book. It only had a single printing in the 1950s. These wonderful yellowed pages. So stained with age, brittle and fragile to the touch. It's such a beautiful and precious thing. So I'd like to read you a story from it. I'm not going to read you the story about the began with his teeth like knives. Not today, maybe another time. It's a fun story, but I want to read a story that cuts much, much deeper than that. And it's a story which some of you will fully understand why it means so much to me. And those of you who don't, well, you can hopefully still enjoy it nonetheless. It's only short, so make sure you're sitting comfortably. Pin back your ears for the story of the Lhiannan Shee. There was once a man going to Cregneash when he was followed by a Lhiannan Shee, a fairy woman. She sighed and pulled his sleeve so that he would look round at her, but he knew if he did that she would have power over him ever after. So he tied his handkerchief over his eyes and stood still. And when she was past, he took the handkerchief off and saw her go to a gorse bush and hide the chest she was carrying beneath the bush. Then she went away. The man tied a shred of his handkerchief to the gorse bush so that he'd remember it and went home. The next day he returned, took the chest from under the bush and carried it home and opened it. There was gold in the chest, lumps and nuggets of it, and besides that a long rope of shining golden hair. The man didn't know what to make of it, for what could he do with a lump of gold and a rope of hair? So he took the chest and hid it under a tramman tree, an elder, for he knew the Lhiannan Shee couldn't get it there. Every night she came sighing round the house, looking in at the window, but the man would never lift his eyes to see her face. At last he thought he'd better get married, and maybe then the fairy woman wouldn't trouble him at all. So he went to Illiam Christian of Port Erne and said, "Wilt thou give me the girl Joni?" But Illiam said, "Joni isn't for the like of thee. There's dew and tear going offering for her, and a good house at 'em, and a pick in the bank." The man said, "I've a house and a cow, and there's gold of me too, the same as a pick in the bank." Illiam said, "Show me the gold. I'm thinking the gold on the cushion flower is all thou'll ever have, and a thatch wanting mending is poor shelter, and a cow that's near dry is no cattle." The man was angry at that, and he went and dug up the chest from under the tramman tree and showed what was in it to Illiam Christian. And Illiam said, "Thou better heave the rope of hair into the sea, for 'tis mermaid's hair, I'm thinking. But the gold they'll take to Doolish, and them that's there'll give thee good money for it." So the man did as Illiam Christian said, and he got good money for the gold, and married Joni. And there was ale de lure, that is, ale in plenty, at the wedding, and the casting of the shoe after the bride, and breaking of the wedding cake over her head. But that night the Lhiannan Shee came looking in at the window and sighing as if her heart would break. "What's that?" said Joni. "It's only the wind in the fuchsia bush," said the man. Then the Lhiannan Shee cried a long, long cry that was borne away on the wind. "There's some person crying outside," said Joni. "'Tis only the curl you calling," said the man. It was not so long after that. The man was lying awake in bed, and his wife had gone to nurse her mother who was sick. The moon was at the full and streamed in through the uncurtained window. Then the Lhiannan Shee came looking in at the window, and the man saw her face, which was more beautiful than moonlight and water, or the first primrose of spring. And he got up and dressed himself and followed her, and no one knows where he went. Though the time seemed to him but a day, it was 7 long years before he came home. He looked in at the window and saw Joni sitting rocking the cradle and a strange man in the master's chair. The man came in on the door and stood there looking at them. "Don't thou know me, Joni?" he said. "'Tis thy husband come home." "No, no," said Joni. 7 long years ago, my first husband was drowned. Fell over the Broome, they're saying, and was never seen again. 5 years I waited for him, and then I married Ewan. There was a brass pan hanging on the wall, and the man saw himself reflected in it. His hair was white, his form bent, and his face withered. As he looked, the Lhiannan Shee came behind him, beyond the open door. He saw her face reflected in the shining brass, and he gave one cry and away into the night and was seen no more. Sometimes, on moonlight nights, one would hear the Lhiannan Shee sighing and see a beckoning hand. But if a man did that, he would say the Lord's Prayer quickly, and many a man carried with him a charm in the shape of a bone of the bollen fish or a twig of kern. As for the gold in Doolish, they're saying it melted away, leaving nothing but a heap of withered leaves. They say, too, that it would be better for a man to jump over the edge of the Broome and be drowned than to look on the face of the Lhiannan Shee. For there's no more peace at him, but wandering forever. For the face of the fairy woman is lovelier than a dream and lonelier than a seabird's cry. And so she is.